All right, looks like we are all in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Deep Dive. I'm super excited for today's episode. The Deep Dive, the show by Game Masters for Game Masters, where we take a deep dive on some of our favorite RPG systems. Tonight, I'm joined by a very special guest in order to close out a season of Deep Dives. Jacqueline Bryk, also known as Jax. Guess who needs no explanation, but I'm going to explain her anyway. Jax has worked on several award-winning products, won a Golden Cobra for LARP design, and has written for White Wolf, Onyx Path, Helmgeth, and a slew of countless others. Known as one of the faces of the safe place, Jax has been featured for not only her exceptional game design, but her legendary understanding and expression of safety mechanics in tabletop RPGs, something that's going to come in really handy in today's topic. Today we're sitting down to unpack one of the meatiest systems we've ever needed to unpack in the deep dive. The king or queen of themes of loss and trauma, Changeling the Lost. Jax, welcome to the show.
Hi.
How are you doing currently?
Well, unfortunately, this is a show of sick people because you had a run-in with COVID, as I heard.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a shame, and I've got shingles because of COVID stress, so I'm recording from my bedroom right now.
And I'm recording from my little side office, so it's fine. We're all home. We're all cozy.
It's all good.
It's how we should be spending the holidays. For the uneducated out there, can you give the audience a rundown? Can you give us a rundown of what you currently have going on in the works right now?
I would love to. Awesome. Currently, I am doing some art design for a project for Fading Suns Pax Alexius, which is being produced by Ulysses Spele. I am developing a book for Cult Divinity Lost, which I believe you talked about on your last episode. I'm specifically developing a book on playing children in Cult Divinity Lost, which is very exciting. I am doing a lot of English language edits on Cult Divinity Lost scenarios, and I will be editing one of their upcoming books as well, which is a lot of fun. I love working with that team. I am doing some writing for Scion 2nd Edition. I'm doing some writing for Changeling the Lost 2nd Edition for another book that's coming out. I have also been starting a series of zines about my experience during quarantine called In the House of Isolation, which you can get off my itch.io. And that's a lot of, dark, heavy thoughts combined with
Mhm.
recipes and just ruminations on quarantine life. So, yep, that's what I've got in the works so far.
They all sound honestly pretty interesting. I think that last one is gonna be the sleeper hit for sure. I,
You
I
think?
I think so. I think a lot of people are probably feeling the same effects here and there, and definitely something to emphasize with. They're gonna be looking for.
Oh, I hope so.
Well, speaking of our topic of tonight, because isolation is going to be a big one that we go over most
Oh,
likely,
it sure is.
can you inform for the uneducated what the system we're talking about today?
I would love to. Changeling the Lost was meant to be what was referred to as a mini line with the New World of Darkness, or as it's referred to now, the Chronicles of Darkness. I believe it came out between 2004 and 2007. And it was meant to be a sort of spiritual successor to Changeling the Dreaming, which has a what's what I'm looking for, has the facade of a very light, innocent tone, but is
Mm-hmm.
actually about, people losing their sense of wonder to a capitalist system. And if you look more darkly into it, is about people's personality being taken over by outside forces. And that's something that the creators of Changeling Lost First Edition really leaned into, this idea of people being stolen away by the Fae and having artificial creatures left in their place. And the first edition was something I encountered. Well, I'll get to that in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But the first edition leaned very heavily into this idea of you have been stolen by the Fae, who may be tiny pixie creatures, they may be 8 foot tall elves, they may be golems made out of car parts or aliens in a UFO, but they steal you away because you are a human who can create conflict, and out of conflict comes stories, and Fae love stories. It's what they live off of. Somehow you escaped. And now you're on Earth, back on Earth, away from under the fairy hill, and there's someone in your place who looks like you and acts like you, but isn't you, and has taken over your life. And you're completely different, and you may have been in Fairy for 100 years and only 5 minutes have passed, or you may have been in Fairy for what felt like an hour and 50 years have passed, and you don't quite fit into your old life anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to make a new life for yourself?
Almost like a game of otherworldly survival, almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Something that I definitely think that Onyx Path probably took a look at when they were designing their newest product, when they're
Hmm.
doing Deviant the Renegade, because very similar themes about like running away and staying away, or whether you choose to, you know, keep yourself gone and made sparse, or if you choose to kind of fight back against your oppressors, the true Fae in this regard.
Hmm.
This is, I just want to remind everyone, this is a very unique deep dive because it's the first time we've ever had someone on the show talking about the system that they've actually written on. And for those that did not know already, Jax here has written a lot on Changing the Law Second Edition, specifically a lot of the safety mechanics and tools.
Oh,
Um,
I also designed the kits.
mhm.
And some of the token rules as well. Let's not forget that.
And from what you said, you have a lot to talk about clarity, which is unfortunately not something we'll probably get in this part, but next part I have an entire section I want to dedicate
Oh,
to
trust
that.
me, I have a lot to say about clarity.
But before we get into the meat of everything, I do want to give everyone a content warning, or else I would be, but I actually think with the one of the faces that run the safety place on our show, that Jax, if you would be so kind to give the content warning for this episode.
I would love to give the content warning for this show. So Changeling the Lost has a lot of content warnings um, for abuse, trauma, unhealthy survival mechanisms, instances of self-harm, instances of assault, both sexual and otherwise. Um, Stalking is a big one. Torture occasionally comes up. I don't think we'll be going very deeply into talking about torture in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Themes of mental illness, uh, themes of healing through difficulty, themes of helplessness. You're gonna see a lot of these in Changeling the Lost.
All right, and you know, this is definitely a topic that I can see is very near and dear to your heart.
Mhm.
What is your personal relationship with Changing the Lost, its themes, and the Chronicle of Darkness line in general?
I'm so glad you asked. So when I was in college, a freshman in college, I had a terrible roommate. This very very religious, very very manipulative and bossy roommate. And I was feeling very trapped in this relationship because my RAs wouldn't do anything, and it felt like being at home, and I couldn't tell why. Now, granted, most of my life was spent as a homeschooled Catholic Republican, which is a weird path for me to have traveled to get where I am now as a queer polyamorous leftist. Um, but I went down to my friendly local game store because up until that point I had only played D&D, and I decided I was going to look through some books, and they happened to have Changeling the Lost on the shelf, and Changeling the Lost drew my attention because it was this beautiful green book with thorns on the cover and a Luna moth impaled on one of the thorns. And I thought, well, I love the book oh God, what the hell was her name? Tatterhood. I was going to say Tamlin and Other Tales, but that's not right because Tamlin is a different fairy story, which is also extremely relevant to Changeling the Lost. But Tatterhood and Other Tales, which is a collection of feminist fairy tales that someone had given me when I was little, and I got really into it. So I picked up this book and I read about people who had been taken from their lives by these beautiful, inhuman creatures and tortured and changed and made to be in the shape that these creatures wanted, and they escaped, and nobody believed them. And this stuck very deeply in my heart
Mm-hmm.
as somebody who grew up with, shall we say, overbearing parents. I have a certain amount of scars from emotional and physical abuse in my past, and emotional regulation was not particularly well modeled for me, except in cases where you were expected to be the nice suburban family. Um, and I was always told, "Oh, you're representative of all homeschoolers. You have to be perfect at all times. You have to be what we say at all times." So this idea of constantly being what your captor says you are resonated very deeply with me, especially with regards to the Fairest, who we will get into later. Um, and it it really stuck with me. I got very into it. There was a time in freshman year after my roommate moved out that I would cover the mirrors in my dorm room because Faye can come through mirrors, and it was this horror that resonated very deeply with me. But it's this horror that also eventually got me into therapy
Mm-hmm.
because I started seeing myself in these changelings, and these changelings in the game were unequivocally harmed by the thing they've gone through, but also irrevocably changed and having to learn how to live with that. So this got me into therapy, and I've happily been in therapy for 7 or 8 years now. It's
Mm-hmm.
doing me a lot of good. Um, Honestly, everybody should have a therapist if they can afford it. I understand if you can't, but it's great to talk to someone. Um, and about 5 years ago, I want to say, um, I was working on Vampire the Requiem, second edition, working on the Ghouls book. God bless Danielle Lowson Harper, who is the person who gave me my first job at Onyx Path, brought me into the fold, honestly gave me a freelance career. I owe her a lot for that. So I wrote 10,000 words for the Ghouls book, and I'm like, I'd really like to work on Changeling the Lost, but it's already in development, so I understand I can't. 2 months later, I get an email from Rose Bailey, who was co-developing the book with Danielle, going, "Hey, so we're redeveloping Changeling the Lost, and I really liked your work on Vampire the Requiem second edition. Do you want to be on Changeling the Lost?" And I said yes. And that was honestly the luckiest break I've ever had in my life, because I have been on the Changeling line since then. I believe I've written on all planned books except for the novella collection,
Mm-hmm.
and I am extremely attached to Changeling the Lost. And people sort of consider it my brand at this point, even though I'm not the line developer. That's Megan Fitzgerald, who is amazing. And she is an incredible developer. She's so good at telling you what she wants and leaning into what you give her if she likes it. And she's just great to work with. But I've been on Changeling the Lost second edition basically since its redevelopment, and I could not be happier.
It's really interesting to hear that, that personal story about yourself. Very rarely do we get, honestly, I don't even want to say very rarely, because it seems like that the people that, that they're developing these connections to systems, but never so much of something like as personal as this have I heard on this show anyway, or even in general. And it kind of sounds like, that Changing the Lost was like your first step into kind of reasserting like it's that control back over in your life.
It's not even reasserting, it was asserting control in my life. And when I tell people all the time that Changing the Lost saved my life. It just did. I would be a completely different person if I hadn't read Changeling the Lost in 2010 in my friendly local game store.
Well, I can, I'm pretty sure I can speak for myself and obviously all the audience there, where we thank Changeling for the Lost for getting into your hands and helping you onto that path.
Well, the weird put it there, so it's good.
Yeah, so some things we can actually maybe notch up to faith. I'm not sure. I've never been too sure about that proponent, but sometimes
okay. The weird is the weird in Changeling the Lost, just to give a quick explanation, the weird is the force of bargains. Is the idea that if something is placed into your hands, you will pay back what was placed into your hands eventually. Changeling the Lost, placed into my hands to save my life. Now I am forever bound to Changeling the Lost.
And you helped give Changeling the Lost second edition, so it works. It comes, it goes. Everything's secular.
Sure does.
All right, so now we're gonna actually, on that note, let's dive right into the game. Well, mainly the setup of the game. What is the main themes of Changeling, and what type of story is Changeling designed to tell?
Great question. So, the main theme, so if you've read the Chronicles of Darkness books, which I know you have, you'll always see a theme and mood in the beginning. And that's something I love about the new Chronicles of Darkness, is how there's a hydrate in the chat.
I have no water, unfortunately, right now. I'll get some.
I'm hydrating.
At least one of us will fulfill it.
You go get some water while I tell these nice people what the theme of Changeling the Lost is.
No, I'll grab it on the break, and I will make up for it. So I'll tally up.
Okay. So Changeling actually has a really fun sort of collection of themes, because Changeling is inherently about inner conflict. I believe on the first edition it says a game of beauty and madness. And in developing the second edition, we were told to think about the themes of beauty and madness, and agony and wonder. And yes, those are the themes of Changeling the Lost, because at its heart, Changeling the Lost is a game about recovery from sustained trauma. And something that I think is really important in games about trauma, be it Bluebeard's Bride, Changeling the Lost, Deviant the Renegade, there needs to be a layer of remove from that trauma, because a lot of people who run games that are just about trauma tend to run them in a linear and sensical fashion. That's not how trauma survivors experience trauma. We tend to flash forward, flash backward, get stuck in time, not remember things. And something about Changeling is that it has this layer of illusion and dreams to it. This idea of, did it really happen? Can I really trust my senses? Clarity, which is your integrity score in Changeling the Lost, is not about how good of a person you are, it's how attached you are to your environment. So when you lose clarity, you actually start losing your grip on reality, and you're more likely to do dangerous things because you're not actually certain what is real and what is illusion around you. And that's something I think that's really important about the themes of Changeling the Lost, because when you tell a story about abuse or a story about manipulation or a story about a really abduction and imprisonment and control and power dynamics over a person, you're not going to tell a story of here's what happened in perfectly sequential order and you remember all of it. That's just not how that works. And for me, for someone who's experienced abusive relationships from family members, from partners, from friends, you feel really guilty about that abuse because some of it was really fun. Like, one of my most abusive partners used to take me to this like $300 fondue restaurant in New York City, and we would spend like 3 or 4 hours gorging on fondue, which is one of my favorite things in the world to do. And, you know, he had the nicest laugh, and he had this beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn that we would spend so much time in. And he had a bathroom with a stained glass window and a 500-gallon tub that I could just sink into and not touch any of the sides of the tub with my body while my body was completely submerged. And I miss that about him. And I feel guilty for missing that about him. But I still do. And if you think of that bathtub and that Brooklyn brownstone and that expensive fondue restaurant and all of these wonderful things that we did, that doesn't negate the fact that he manipulated me and lied to me and used me as an emotional pincushion and repeatedly told me that I was becoming scary because I wasn't pliable enough and things like that. And that's sort of where you get this agony and wonder and beauty and madness and just these conflicting feelings constantly running at each other, because like now I don't remember our entire relationship in sequential order. It's just not information that's stuck in my head. But I can remember his laugh, and I can remember when he told me to shut the fuck up when I was trying to console him on something he was upset about. And you sort of get this in Changeling, these flashes of memory, this way you remember your time in Arcadia. Something I think a lot of GMs sort of mess up with Changeling is that it's very easy to focus on your durance. Your durance is your time in Arcadia. It's the time that the Fae kidnapped and held you. And a lot of people tend to lean into that and be like, oh, that's the most interesting part of Changeling, is you being trapped and suffering in Arcadia. It's not, because at its heart, Changeling is not a game about the abuse itself. It's a game about rebuilding your life from the abuse and learning that you are a different person now than you were before then, and how to deal with that.
That was an awesome answer. Like,
Thank you.
Holy shit. No, that's
I'm gonna drink some more of this one.
Yeah, and it's honestly it's gonna tie back into a lot of the things that we're gonna talk about here. Yeah, it's definitely, I honestly feel like the stories of recovery is more interesting than the durance itself.
I agree.
And how that can, and that's all, like, and I can even think back to my own like past, like, you know, borderline abusive like relationships with people, and how when you think back to it, sometimes you know, you're like, well, was it, you try to, you second guess yourself, you're like, was it really that bad? And you play like the human highlight reel. But to everyone at home that might be in that, it's always worse than it was just as bad as you thought. Never doubt yourself that.
Somebody will have always had it worse. That doesn't mean you didn't have it bad.
Exactly. Someone else's suffering doesn't negate your own.
Exactly.
And people that play that card against you are terrible, and you should let them know that they're terrible.
Oh yeah.
So Changeling is often, and crudely so, referred to as the game of trauma simulation. Can you give us an explanation on the way that you would conduct a proper session zero in order to use these safety tools for an enjoyable experience for everyone? And would you recommend almost a higher level of safety in your session zero in this game compared to like others?
So I try at least to have the same level of safety in session zero for all of my games. I run a lot of horror games. So one of my favorite games to run is Bluebeard's Bride. So I try to be very clear with all of my players about what it is I'm trying to run. Something I very much believe in, and something that Kiana Shaw and Lauren Bryant Monk, who wrote the Annie Award-winning tabletops TTRPG safety packet, which you can get for free on Google Docs. Something we all sort of agree on is this idea that you need to be upfront with your players about what you're planning on running. I see this a lot in LARP design, and a little less so with tabletop, because I think it's sort of penetrated more into the tabletop space, but this sort of old school idea of you need to be willing to surprise your players, and your players can't predict your moves, because if you do, then you're a bad GM or whatever. I'm sure you've seen those memes about, oh my god, my players, ruined my plot within 5 minutes and they had no idea what it was. And I fucking hate those memes.
Mm-hmm.
Those are those perpetrate a really, I think, damaging tabletop and LARP culture. This idea that you need to be able to surprise and shock your players, when really what you want to do, sure, surprise is fun, but I prefer suspense personally. So letting people know, hey, I'm going to have these elements in my game. They're going to come up. They're going to come up. You're just waiting for them to come up. And if we have a session 0 where I'm like, okay, so I want to have a fae in this game who's pursuing you guys. It's a fae of the depths of the ocean, and she wants to hold you in her loving embrace, which basically means drowning you repeatedly. And there's going to be themes of drowning and helplessness and people cornering you in tight places and high pressure. Let's talk about how that could affect you. I think that makes for a much better game than just going, oh yeah, we're gonna play Changeling the Lost and I'm not gonna tell you what's happening. And I love the Gehenna Gaming safety questionnaire of the
consent form.
Yes, the consent form. Thank you. Words are hard.
No worries. Same always happens to me.
Yeah. The Monty Cook consent in gaming document. Great resource. Lauren Bryant Monk and Kiana Shaw's TTRPG safety guide. Great resource. A lot of people also make the mistake, though, of just sort of slamming that down on the table and going, look, it is safe now because I've put the safety resource down on the table. And that's not how that works. You actively have to engage with your players. And something that I love talking about in safety especially is safety is another language, right? Mm-hmm. Something that is weird about Western society in a lot of ways is we have this idea, there's that whole conflict between ask culture and guest culture, and we're also not really encouraged to enforce our own boundaries, because if someone's clearly trying to be nice but they keep stepping on your goddamn toes and elbowing you in the face, it's really easy to go, oh yeah, they're trying to be nice, I shouldn't be so upset about this, but they're still stepping on your toes and elbowing you in the goddamn face. I had an incident recently because my husband is currently out of town caring for his mother, and for some reason this has caused people to send me 5-paragraph emails or texts of advice that I didn't ask for. Now, if it's advice I asked for, that's great. But people have just been sending me these 5-paragraph messages of hello, I see that you're feeling bad. Have you considered reminiscing on the good times and getting a pet? I'm I live in a rented townhouse and I don't want to think about the good times because then I'll be sad. And I've had to sort of learn how, in English, to sort of push and go, thank you, I appreciate you making the time to say this to me, but this is not helpful and is in fact kind of useless. And it harmful. Presumes a lot. Yeah. What safety tools do is they give you a shared language at the table to be able to say, okay, this means stop, this means slow down, this means go harder. And it gives us a constructed language to be able to say that in a way we all understand and accept with no hurt feelings, because once you buy into the safety rules, you are understanding and accepting that people are allowed to have boundaries and allowed to enforce them. And I think that's something that's really important with Changeling the Lost. And hell, you could even tie it into the sort of like contracts and the weird, because you're all entering into this oath, this agreement that the players are more important than the game, and people's comfort level is more important than the GM being able to tell what they think is a story, but is again stepping on someone's foot and elbowing them in the face, or another player going, "Oh, I want to have a terribly dramatic story that will override everybody else at the table and be full of my personal suffering," but goes back to that metaphor.
Yeah, and it's and what I really like about it is I feel like as a GM, you could feel more comfortable after the safety tools. You know, by establishing those boundaries, you're like, okay, this is where I can, you know, fiddle about. This is where I can get darker in without worrying about hurting everyone's feelings, because I know that everyone's checked green, and this,
Yep.
you know, I can just compensate. I can pull back in some places, and just branch out in others.
Hold on, my humidifier is doing a weird ghost thing.
It's the Fae. They're trying to tell
Yeah,
you.
they
Come
are.
back.
I don't like that. Hold on. I'm gonna.
No worries.
There we go. Hold on.
Fae, if you're trying to interrupt my deep dive, I will come find you. I don't care. You can have your fetch back later.
See, now I'm spookier because it's just my black light.
Yeah, and the cool markings.
Yes, I decided to do UV reactive
I think
makeup
so,
today.
Oh, that's so fucking cool. I apologize for everyone. I know I've been telling everyone that I was supposed to be dressed up for this deep dive. Unfortunately, my medical stuff has forced me not to be able to go outside, but I will be hopefully ordering some stuff that I can look very holiday cheer
Hell yeah.
in 2 weeks.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I just had to wind up turning off my humidifier because it's just like, I'm gonna change colors repeatedly. I'm like, that's unnerving.
Are you trying to tell me a message or something?
Yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah. Stay silent. So Changeling the Lost is it's a huge book. It's massive. Over 300 pages, which, you know, some people, if they're like, you know, all they've really ever played is like you know, your D&D type games, are like, oh, well, isn't that normal? And we're kind of moving towards RPGs that are almost like a little bit smaller, under like 150 pages, like novella size, like zine size RPGs.
I've written RPGs that are a page long, so
that's, yeah, there's like challenges for that too. It's like one page RPG. So do you think, as a first GM that is going into Changeling, that gets the book or they buy the PDF, do they need to browse the whole book, read it start to finish? Can it just be something they can just reference here and now and again? And then how do you feel about the layout in the book in general? Because the layout's always super important in terms of digesting that information.
Of course I love the layout because I worked on the book. So, I'm just saying. No, I think if you're going to start running Changeling, what you really should do is reference the storytelling chapter. I believe that's chapter 6 in the big book. I don't currently have my author copy on me because I lent it to a guy who I was interested in and I'm no longer interesed in, and I have to wait for him to give it back. So that's a very Fae thing I did recently. But no, I think it's important really to understand sort of the context of the game first. I mean, you don't have to memorize all of the contracts, you can reference those. I don't think you have to, honestly, with any game, I don't think you have to memorize anything, right? Like, the book is there to be a tool. The book isn't there to be read once and then be done with it. The book is there to be constantly referenced. And I think sort of reading up on what it means to be a changeling and what sort of changeling characters you might expect in your game and whomst might be wanting to play what in your game and how that fits into your setting. And something we haven't talked about yet is the hedge, which is sort of the between realm between the real world or the mortal world and Arcadia or Faerie, depending on who you're talking to. And this sort of liminal space that the changelings feel very at home in, which is one of, I think, a really cool metaphor for how people in our situation or people in a changeling situation might not find comfort in spaces that are wholly one or wholly the other, but having a space of your own, a liminal space of your own that you can go to and rest and replenish is really important. And I mean, obviously the hedge isn't super safe because it's the between realm between fairy and the mortal world, and it's where the fae come through in order to kidnap people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a place of growth and possibility. Goblin fruits, which are these magical food items that you can find in the hedge. They're not always food items. Like there's this, one of my favorites is the stab apple, which is an apple tree with these giant thorns that you can break off and turn into swords. Those are great. I love those. So I'll tell you a secret, something I wrote in an upcoming book.
Mm-hmm.
The hamster fruit, which is it's a little hamster. It's a little leaf hamster. And it holds glamour for you.
That's awesome. Part fruit, part hamster.
Yeah.
All adorable.
Oh, woe is me, oh, woe is me. I used to have a hamster tree, but it was eaten by a newt. And now I have no cuddly fruit.
Is that in the book? Oh, the song? Okay. Lips are sealed.
I have told you too much.
Too much. Just right before our memory, we're gone. Before the humidifier starts acting up again.
Yeah, right? It is unplugged, so if it starts acting up again, we know who it is.
Funny story, I'll just interject for everyone here. Because Changeling is a game that's actually pretty near and dear to my heart. I've only played it a handful of times. But for some people that might be here, that might know me from when I got everyone into tabletop in college, because I was that guy. Like everyone was like, oh, I always want to try tabletop, but never could in high school. And I was like, well, let me do that for you, as a friend did that for me in college. The first actual play I ever tried to record, well, it was like a podcast, was we played World of Darkness, and it was called Goblin Fruit.
Aww.
Because I really liked Changeling at the time. And I don't even think we played Changeling. I think we played like a mixed bag, and one of them was a Changeling. And I was like, oh, this is what we're calling it, because it's whimsical, it's kind of double meaning, it's something that, you know, you can be like, hey, have you heard the latest episode of Goblin Fruit? So
I love that.
Rest in peace, Goblin Fruit. Your 6 episodes will be missed one day.
Aww.
So getting past my personal stories, so this is kind of like a generic question I kind of throw out for everything, but I do think it's super important. Do you think Changeling's the type of system that you would choose for a one-shot or over a campaign? Or do you think the campaign's long-term implications within the Changeling story benefit more of us playing it over several sessions?
Trying to figure out how to answer this. Because I'm not really sure what the question is.
Would you rather, okay, so is Changeling better as a one-shot or a campaign? I'm sorry.
It really depends on the story you're trying to tell, I think. If you're telling a story about running from huntsmen during the annual wild hunt, it's probably better as a one-shot. If you're telling a story about a freehold or a motley growing together and healing each other and learning how to play nice together, it's better as a campaign. I mean, it works for all sorts of things. I personally, as a GM, prefer to run one-shots or like timed out campaigns, like, okay, so this is going to run for this many sessions and here's what we're going to do in each session. But there's no reason that you couldn't fit it to run for your style.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like a lot. I know me personally, I've been moving towards doing one shots, or as I like to call, or single season campaigns.
Yes.
Like just 8 sessions were done. So now we're going to jump into something I titled The Wonderful and Terrifying Weird World.
Hell yeah.
So we're going to start at the basics. Some people might know this already, some people might not, but it's still good to cover our tracks. What's the best explanation and definition you can say for what the Fae are? What are the Fae?
I'm so glad you asked me this question.
It's almost like a sent the questions to you before.
I also just sorry, I was giving myself a moment because I like smiled and then my eyes went dark and I was like, hell yeah, I want to really freeze on this for a second because it's weird. But with that explanation, some people think Fae are the dreams of humans. Some people think humans are the dreams of Fae.
Mm-hmm.
The best explanation you can give of Fae is that Fae are an idea, they are an aesthetic. If a Fae has a title, like the Mistress of Red Crowns, the things she will be able to do are, for example, nail hats to people's heads, or pour molten gold over their heads. Something that has to do with the color red, fire, crowns, hats, things of that nature. She's not going to be able to control storms. This is actually an example that's given in the book. Fae are... The best way I've ever heard it put is Fae are actors on a stage. They can't function without a script. Now, of course, you could make the argument of, oh, there's improv actors. No, we're talking about actors in a play. Fae are acting out a role that they have been given in their titles. They will always have a title. Fae will always have at least one title, and they will always act within the purview of that title. Some Fae have more than one title. They tend to break themselves off into pieces so that they can act in as many titles as possible. Something I think a lot of GMs get tripped up on the idea of is, oh, Fae are all these beautiful elf people who all dress in green and dance under the fairy hill and ride a horse. No. Some of them are. That's great. Good for them. Some of my favorite Fae are like the 3 androgynes from the core book, who are gray aliens born of the human dreams of UFOs. And their whole thing is they abduct humans and put them in their fairy spaceship and perform experiments on them. And they have a human zoo. There's also the Year of Plague. The Year of Plague doesn't have a physical form. It is literally just a pandemic that takes place in its realm, in Faerie, and watches to see how people react to the plague. It can, of course, create people in the plague, but something that they don't have is meaningful conflict. Because, of course, they could pit their titles against each other, but at the end of the day, whoever wins is going to be the person who the other Fae like better. They're always performing for this audience, the audience being themselves and other Fae. And they're always performing these dramas on a stage, their stage being their realm in Arcadia. But the people who bring conflict, the people who bring a story, the people who bring unexpected twists to the grand drama the Fae are playing out are humans. Because while Fae can essentially create things in their realm like a god, they can't act outside of the purview of their title. Mm-hmm. So the Year of Plague is not going to create a beautiful community garden that people can nourish themselves at and maybe that helps stop the plague. It's not going to do that. It's also not going to create a beach house that people are going to party at during, what they think is their last year of life. People who do that are humans, because humans don't have a title that they have to attach themselves to. The Fae eat that shit up, literally. So they're these beings of dream and illusion who have this fantastic power, but at the end of the day, that fantastic power is limited by their title and by the weird being that force of bargaining we were talking about earlier. Fae need bargains with humans, including the Changeling contract, because if you are kidnapped by a Fae, you actually have to swear certain contracts in order to be able to live in their realm, because otherwise Faerie can be incredibly hostile to humans. Mm-hmm. So Fae, need, in order to power themselves, need human conflict and need those contracts with humans in order to be able to have this fantastic magical power. And their power is bounded by the idea of what they are. They are the idea of what they are. That's the thing about humans. Humans aren't just the idea of what they are. Fae are.
It's awesome. It's kind of like they're bound to their own mythos
They are.
almost. Would you argue, or would you make the point that Fae don't really have a concept of free will?
It's hard to say, because Fae, once again, can do anything within the purview of their title.
Mm-hmm.
And does that mean they have free will? Does that mean they don't have free will? Does that mean they have bounded free will? Does it matter?
Probably not in the grand scheme of things. It's weird that not even weird, not weird in a good way though. It's super interesting, I should say, that a game about being being an escaped slave to the Fae, where the Fae themselves are often a slave to themselves.
Yes.
It's their own idea. It's an awesome
They're
parallel.
they're sort of a slave to their own, again, they're slave to their own mythos, they're slave to their own idea of themselves. And that sort of parallels, in my experience, a lot of users,
Mm-hmm.
because they have this image of themselves that is very, very much the core of their being, because if anything interrupts that image of themselves,
It just all falls apart.
oh yeah, like one of my abusive partners had this idea of himself that he was this incredibly powerful businessman, right? Like he was a smooth, suave salesman, and he could get anyone to do anything he wanted to. And if someone said no or threw up a boundary that he couldn't get around, he would literally just dissolve into a puddle of tears and tell me how he couldn't trust people in his life because people in his life never gave him what he wanted, starting from when he was 8 years old and his parents promised to buy him a bicycle for Christmas but couldn't because they didn't have enough money. And how was he supposed to trust people after that? And then when he failed out of Columbia twice, his girlfriend, now his wife, who was in a doctoral program for harmonic mathematics, was like, oh, of course I'll drop out and support you. But then she didn't. And how is he supposed to trust her fully after that? And it became very much this idea of he was the person who got what he wanted. Mm-hmm. And anybody who didn't give him what he wanted was subjected to a shaping attack until they gave him what he wanted. Because the idea isn't the world around me shapes it and I move through the world. The idea is I shape the world to fit me. My world will fit me or it will not be the world.
Mm-hmm. And that's definitely a nice that's definitely like a mindset of a lot of abusers. And I feel like we could even track that back to why the Fae kidnap in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I have to be slave to my mythos, you will also be a slave to me. Like,
yep.
It's just a cycle. Ugh.
You will be a slave to my mythos, and you will cause my mythos to evolve in interesting ways, because without you and my mythos, nobody experiences my mythos. And if nobody experiences my mythos, how can I live?
They're tools of survival.
Yep.
That's a great. I've never, honestly, that sentence right there, that's something like new. Like, I've just come to realization while we have this call. That's awesome. I've never even considered that. That's why the Fae kind of do these things.
Yep.
So, what would you say? Other than the idea of fulfilling this idea, do the Fae have a purpose in the grand scheme of things in relation to like the whole Chronicles of Darkness whole? If they don't, that's fine too.
I think that really depends on how you're running your game. Because with the advent of the God Machine Chronicle, which, by the way, one of the best things to ever happen to anything of darkness. I love the God Machine. I was fucking obsessed. Can I swear on this channel? I can swear on this channel, right? I was fucking obsessed with the first iteration of the Voice of the Angel when I first read it, because the other thing I read in my friendly local game store was the Blue Book. And like, I was obsessed with the Voice of the Angel and Marco Singh, rather. Like, I have this running joke that Marco Singh is my boyfriend. For those of you who don't know, Marco Singh is the Pain Prophet in The Voice of the Angel, which is the opening fiction to the God Machine Chronicle.
Hell of a
And I
boyfriend to
love him.
have.
He's my boyfriend. I love him so much. Okay, I'm gonna deviate real quick. I have a running joke in every single game I work on that I have a boyfriend from that line. So in Cult, my boyfriend is the tomb guardian who guards the Demiurge's tomb in the City of the Dead because he's very polite. He just kind of stands there and go, no, you cannot enter the tomb. He'll talk to you. He'll like tell you about stuff. He'll tell you gossip from other people who have been there. You just don't enter the tomb. It'll be fine. Just don't enter the tomb.
Then you won't have a problem.
Yeah, he's great. He's a good boy, and I love him.
You know what that teaches? Respecting people's boundaries.
It really does. And like in Black Madonna, Katya, who is one of the 3 female Nephirites, who underwent fucking horrible torture at the hands of Chogdiel, is my girlfriend as well, because she's great. Basically, if you put a female Nephirite in any cult game, it's my girlfriend. This is how it works. But with the God Machine Chronicle, the Fae could be all sorts of fucking weird shit. Cause there's that one God Machine Chronicle adventure where there's the portals that spin outward and like absorb people and take them into this like horrifying realm of just disjointed color and sound. And in I think it's an Exalted, which actually leads into Old World of Darkness, which I insist leads into Chronicles of Darkness, but we'll get to that at some point. Maybe. I have huge conspiracy theories about why
there's a whole line of how it like technically ended and might have been reborn. It's super possible.
Anyway, Ian Watson will hate me for that because he's like, okay, look, Exalted goes into World of Darkness, but World of Darkness doesn't go into Chronicles of Darkness. I'm like, you're wrong, but I love you. But in Exalted, Feyre is a larger sort of system of chaos outside of the world where the Raksha live. And in some games I've played with Changeling, the spaces between the different Fey domains are either like these giant swirling like realms of chaos, or they're just empty stages, basically, right? So the idea that there's these portals leading to Feyre that are pulling new people in could very easily fit into the God Machine Chronicle. And, you know, the Fae in that place could serve as the God Machine's repository for human dreams. Could in Mage the Awakening, one of the towers is in Arcadia. That could, you know, you could put it into your mage game and have it be there was in Equinox Road, which is actually my favorite book for first edition. There was this whole thing about mages trying to venture into Arcadia to find their watchtower, and getting to the watchtower and realizing it's empty because it's just the watchtower is a beacon for new mages. It's not meant to be returned to once you're actually a mage. The watchtower is meant to pull you through Arcadia as a journey so that you can get there and write your name on the watchtower. If you go back to the watchtower when you're a full-fledged mage, the hell's that going to do for you? And now you're in Arcadia, and now the Fae know there's a mage in Arcadia. And that seems like a bad idea. But, you know, there's like, you could play with themes of hubris, you could play with themes of dreams or expectations. The important part of the existence of the Fae, specifically in Changeling Lost, is they are the force that changes you as a person. They are the metaphor for the abusive partner, the abusive parents, the traumatic experience, the addiction, the imprisonment, any of those things. That's what the Fae are meant to be a metaphor for.
And kind of one other point I was thinking, because one of the last books I picked up was the Contagion Chronicle, and if we operate off the deal that maybe if the God Machine, if Arcadia itself is just repository of human dreams and imagination, or just the mythos around it, what happens? And like if you say something like Contagion and that stuff starts to break down or leak through or infect, it's such a crazy concept, you know.
That's a problem.
That's a big problem, as we So I was going to ask about what Arcadia represents as a theme. I feel like we might have covered that though in your
I feel
previous
like we
answer.
covered it, yeah, because Arcadia is, again, the place where the Fae perform their own mythos. It is their home. Now, it's interesting because Changeling Lost 2nd edition actually suggests that the Fae weren't always in Arcadia. We don't know what was there before. We don't know if they're ever going to leave. But Arcadia may not have been the place the Fae originated. And this may just be another instance of them taking something over and forcing it to perform to their will.
That's honestly a super interesting theory. And another question that I'm going to deviate from my list for a second, just because I want to stick on the Fae for a little bit more. So we talked about, you know, humans being the changeling themselves being the kind of tools in order they survive. Do you think it's almost like I want to say like a never-ending story kind of theme, where if the humans just stop believing in the Fae, eventually the Arcadia would just crumble, or the Fae would just pop out of existence? Do you think that's something that might be possible, or?
I'm not sure. I don't think it's as simple as clap your hands if you believe with the Fae, because a lot of modern day people don't really believe in fairies anymore. But a lot of, you know, there are still people who practice pagan faiths or reconstructionist faiths that have Fae in them. But I wouldn't say that's a majority of people. I don't think it's necessarily if people stop believing in Fae, but if people stop believing that there are places that are off limits or otherworldly. I saw so a friend of mine, Clementine Morrigan, writes these excellent zines. And one of them was called Trauma Magic, and she writes about Celtic belief in fairies as a form of environmentalist religion. And there's this idea that if, for example, there's a ring of stones on top of a hill, you don't disturb it. Or a fairy ring of mushrooms. Or if there is a tree growing in the middle of a field, you don't cut it down because that's clearly an entrance to fairy. There's this idea of there are places we don't go near. There are things we don't disturb. There are places in the wilderness that we leave untouched out of respect. And then there's also the idea of fairies as enforcers of social norms, right? Like, you always, there's all those weird superstitions about fairies, like you always leave an offering at a fairy ring, or you don't wear red or step in a fairy ring, or if you don't want to be noticed, you turn a piece of clothing inside out. Basically, this idea that there are certain rituals that seem like they don't do anything, but in reality are protecting you from a greater danger. That's something that's easily translated into human life, right? Like, saying please and thank you causes people to engage with you more. Just all of these, weird social rituals, training people to perform social rituals through a fairy tale causes people to be more accepting of engaging in social rituals. So if you don't have social rituals, if you don't have places that you avoid out of respect, if you don't have this sort of idea of contracting with someone, then I think that's where the Fae are in trouble.
If you don't basically, or you're not bound by society and its influence. Yes. That's something we're gonna get. I think that's something we're literally gonna get into the question after this next one. But for there, I'm gonna shelve that point because I do want to come back to it. So actually, I think we can even skip this next one because we talked about Arcadia already being extremely abstract. And as a GM, how do you describe that and put forth of your idea of what Arcadia is in your game? And I feel like you've already provided the excellent tool that Arcadia can be anything.
Yep. Also, your players really shouldn't be going directly to Arcadia for any reason unless it's the end game.
Or I would assume it'd be like what they remember of it, if they remember anything.
Something that I see GMs fuck up with a lot is this idea that changelings perfectly remember their durance. or they, you know, are engaging with their durance as though it happened yesterday. And really what you're getting is the sort of weird magical thinking trauma memories that you're getting as somebody who has been traumatized. You're getting, you know, the flashes of things that happen, you're fast forwarding, you're rewinding, you're doing what Clementine Morrigan calls trauma time traveling, which yeah, you're just not staying in any particular moment. You don't remember it sequentially. You might not even remember it. Like, you're going to remember some things about your durance, but you're not going to remember it fully.
And sometimes you might just remember the ideas like completely incorrect or just backwards. And that might be something crazy that if you do get to your end game with going to Arcadia and you go there and you realize your players are like, this is nothing like I thought it was, and that's often something really real for people.
Oh yeah. Like, I'm sure if I went back to my abusive boyfriend's house with the beautiful stained glass window and the 500-gallon tub, that tub would be much smaller than I remembered.
And that stained glass its colors will have worn down. Actually super symbolic. Really. So we're gonna get probably to the heaviest topic of today's episode.
Well, we have been going for an hour, so would you like to take a break before we get into some really heavy stuff?
That actually sounds like a great idea. So everyone, we're gonna sit back and we're gonna do a 5-minute break. Before we get back, I will get water and I will redeem that hydrate that was redeemed about half an hour ago and give into that as well. So I'll go ahead and put us on that break. Thank you, Jax, for looking over our well-being for this episode.
Hell yeah.
I super appreciate that. And everyone, we will be back in just a few
minutes.
We'll be
back.
So sit tight. And we're back with the deep dive on
Hell yeah.
Changeling the Lost with my special guest, Jacqueline Bryk, at your service. I was, what's it called? I was disciplined a little bit before the show because I'm blaming Mark for this. Last Cult deep dive, we were calling Jax Brook. That is
It's
not
okay. I blame Mark too.
Mark, you should know better.
Do better.
Because I have no responsibility in my
Y'all
own.
also called the Archons the Death Angels, and I was like, no.
Oh, you know what? I'm not gonna. So I recently got the PDF of Cult, and honestly, I've been sitting here and been like, man, I'm getting kind of bored. I need to read something. I was like, I should just order the physical book and just go ahead because I read.
Yeah,
books.
do it.
I should. It's. Oh, I love huge books, and I need it on my.
All the huge book.
And Changeling, is actually, unfortunately, one of the only like Call of Darkness books I don't have.
Oh.
I have Mage, Geist, and I believe I have Promethean somewhere around here. I used to. I might have been lost in the last move, but that's a search for another day.
Promethean is actually my husband's favorite game because
Really?
it specifically tells the story of becoming human.
I do love Promethean. Oh, I have to ask because you were talking about Exalted before, and so I need to ask before we get back on track. Have you heard of or played what I don't know, everyone calls it like the best fan supplement ever written for World of Darkness, the Exalted versus the World of Darkness?
I have not played that.
That's it's essentially basically you put Exalted characters in the World of Darkness.
Oh, fun.
Age, and it's crazy. I always like heard of it. I know it's like a super niche game, but I'm always like, oh. Because when I was younger, that was like one of the fun stuff we got to play.
Weirdly, I have played the Cult World of Darkness crossover, which is called Jail of Night.
Yeah, we were talking about that last episode. Mark was talking about it last episode.
And you can find it pretty easily if you search Jail of Night. It was in White Wolf magazine.
That's fucking awesome. If you mind me asking, what was the first tabletop game you ever played?
Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay. I was that's usually the usual answer, but surprisingly enough, the first game I ever played, I know it's gonna sound so weird and so meaty, was Mage the Awakening.
Really?
Yeah.
Ooh.
And then it was
that's quite the introduction.
Yeah, and then it was D&D 4th edition.
Oh yeah.
But I remember playing Mage the Awakening and being like, what is that? And it just always stuck with me.
That's awesome. No, my first game ever was D&D 3.5. Yes, I understand that it's not great, but it's a game that I am extremely attached to.
I I mean, I feel like D&D is fine. Like everyone can enjoy Dungeons and Dragons. I
Oh,
mean, it's
sure. No, I mean specifically 3.5 had a lot of bugs and problems, and
oh
it
yeah.
took forever to make a fucking character, but it taught me a lot of good rules of thumb. Like the book that I actually credit. Oh, we redeemed another hydrate. Hold on.
Oh,
Oh, look, we match.
I have the corporate sellout cup. I'm sorry, everyone.
It's okay. I'll forgive you this time.
Next
Next
episode, we're
time.
bringing the nog. We're bringing.
Thank you for that hydrate, Bobby. I appreciate it. But yeah, no, the book I actually credit with teaching me that I liked horror and how to run horror games is actually Heroes of Horror for 3.5, written by Ari Marmel, who is a friend of mine. And I discovered actually years later wrote the book after he was a friend of mine, which I think is hilarious. And it's by itself and as a D&D supplement, it's not very good. And I love Ari very much. Don't get me wrong. I think Ari did great work on the book. It's very hard to run horror in D&D for a lot of reasons, mostly because D&D's primary gameplay loop is fight monster, get treasure, fight monster, get treasure.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not really a lot of good ways to circumvent that gameplay loop. And in order for horror to be your game to be horror, you have to have a certain amount of not helplessness, but like feeling overwhelmed, at least for the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And D&D doesn't do overwhelmed very well. Unless you're like having them fight like CR25 creatures, but then it's not necessarily horror, is it?
It's just rock attack at that point.
Yeah. But it was the first book I ever read to be like, here are some themes you can use in your game, and here's how you put them in your game. And I was like, whoa, that's so cool. You could do that. Whoa. And then they had the like a horror contract in that book in like
Mm-hmm.
I think that God, when was that book written? 95?
I don't know if you remember this, but we were talking about tones and atmosphere. Because you brought up Heroes of Horror before. So my first 3.5 campaign I ever completed, we used Heroes of Horror rules. So that book is very near and dear to my heart with all the rules on the taint and all the other.
Yeah, yes. You can't forget taint. These monsters, they're just full of taint. And sometimes you've got to go into areas where people might touch you on the taint to get rid of your taint. And then if your taint gets too big,
that's just not a word we like to use anymore.
No.
Damn it, society has ruined the word taint for us.
It's still funny.
It's just so I feel like
and then of course you have the taint mage.
Oh my god.
There's taint wizards.
And if you go into some really old 3rd edition ones, you can get. I remember someone telling me like, "Yeah, I'm gonna make a cancer mage." I was like, "What the fuck?"
Oh god, I forgot about that. Yeah, that's in Book of Vile Darkness, isn't it?
Yeah, and like the bloat wizard and.
Yeah, those are fucking weird. I liked Book of Vile Darkness. It is not as good as Heroes of Horror, and that book, honestly, that book shouldn't be as legendary as it is. But what are you gonna do?
It's got its niche, and you know what? I think after having that nice little palate cleanser, it's great to jump back in.
Hell yeah!
So
let's do it.
We're about to talk about the real big topic for tonight. We're talking about the durance.
The durance.
So the durance often describes the face, not only the face strange reasoning for why the characters themselves are kidnapped, but as well as their time, their escape, and their eventual how they came to be at the start of the game. Now, it's something that I thought was super interesting, and I wrote down here that the Fae often reason with the captors and telling their captors and telling them, you know, it's not our fault you were kidnapped. It's because you broke this contract, or you broke this rule, or this sub article. And it's very true to life with real abusers who make their victims feel like they're responsible for the situation they're in, which is a completely false and it's horrible. I feel like this might have an obvious answer to it, but was this a blatant parallel that Onyx Path wanted to draw between?
I mean, yeah, more or less. Something we try to do with our games is to not make it the abuse game or the queer game.
Mm-hmm.
Like Demon the Descent in a lot of ways is a very trans game, right? Because you're in a body that is not your own and you're using that to pass as human in the world, and you feel like you are something completely different, and you feel like you are not fitting in with the machine of society. And like, if you look at Demon and you don't have on your sort of queer theory glasses, it's very easy to miss that.
Mm-hmm.
Vampire the Requiem is a game about feeling like a monster, whether you are actually an abuser who is like somebody who actively preys on people, or whether you are someone who has toxic traits, whether from actually being abused, being raised in an abusive household, being mistreated by a system. If you're someone who has toxic coping mechanisms, like a lot of us do, and taking those to their logical extremes. But again, if you're not reading Vampire the Requiem with the trauma-informed lens, and that's okay. You're not always going to get that out of the game. The themes of the like Promethean, also about building your place in a society, like coming to, redeeming yourself, becoming part of a community, being able to be part of a community, being able to build yourself into a community. And of course, Deviant, the upcoming Deviant, is very much about institutional abuse and how systems that encourage, like, it's very related to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, like, and why the series Ratched isn't great, because the whole point of Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is that she is somebody who people outside of this institution view as nice and normal, but she is in an institution that incentivizes her to be cruel to prisoners. So she harms them because that's what the system incentivizes her to do, and that's sort of the point of Deviant. And in Changeling, you have people who are brought into a situation because of XYZ, and then escape the situation, but escape the situation completely changed, right? And yes, you can call it a trauma game. In a lot of ways, it is a trauma game, but it's also a game about playing changelings, right? It is also a game about fairy tales. It is also a game about magical powers. It just also happens to be a game about real world abuse, if that makes sense.
Which I feel like it's great. It's nice that it has that duality. It's something super serious that you can kind of play through, but you still have that form of escapism and
yeah. And I mean, it can easily be a didactic game if you want it to be. Didactic meaning the game is trying to teach you a moral, because again, it is a game about fairy tales, and I think I'm using the word didactic correctly. Let me check. Hold on. It can very easily be a game about fairy tales, because fairy tales are also about teaching you things, right? Didactic. Yes. So it can very easily be a didactic game if you want it to be. It also doesn't have to be. But what it should always be is a game about people who have gone through this horrible experience and have come out changed and are now having to live with that change.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's very easy for GMs, for people who are just getting into Changeling the first time, to be like, oh, the most important part of this game is the Durance. And for a while, I was one of those people. Like, I was somebody who was very invested in what happened during the Durance because I was in an abusive situation. And, it seemed like, oh, well, playing through the Durance seems like the most real part of the game, because that's when changelings are wholly immersed in the fantasy that is the true Fae and are being constantly put through the cycle of abuse by the true Fae.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to get caught up in, oh, well, that's the most real part of the game, but it's not. Because being a changeling is being someone who has been changed by the Durance. And the Durance changes you, but it's not your entire story. The Durance is just how you become a changeling. And the Durance specifically refers to your time in Arcadia. It doesn't refer to your escape. It doesn't refer to what comes after, but the Durance is what you endure. That's why it's called the Durance.
Mm-hmm. Isn't like it's kind of like almost like a real life lesson that you just kind of said there. It's like the whole game of the Changeling isn't about the Durance, much like for people that are victims of abuse out there. Mm-hmm. Your abuse isn't the only thing about you. It might have changed you in a way, but that's not your story. That's not where it ends.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still kind of in the world of Arcadia right now, in the Fae, but now we're gonna talk about the world that lies on the edge of reality in Arcadia, the Hedge. This world is described as abstract, strange, but also strangely familiar. To you personally, what is the Hedge and what does it represent?
Have you ever watched the movie Labyrinth?
I have.
Yeah, that's what going through the hedge is like. That's the best way I have to describe it. Is the movie Labyrinth is about a girl going through the hedge to rescue her brother who has been kidnapped by the Fae. Because her brother's literally kidnapped by the Fae because she went, I wish the Goblin King would come and take you away right now, and whoops. So now she is sworn to go get him back, and there's actually mechanics for this in Changeling Law 2nd Edition, the Avowed, who are people who are bound to their, bound by love or trust or familial bonds or a promise they made to somebody who was kidnapped by the Fae, and the Weird reaches out and goes, hey, this person needs you.
Mm-hmm.
So this person is actually called into Arcadia not by the Fae, but by the Weird itself, which reaches out and grabs you and goes, hey, this debt is unpaid. You need to go make sure that debt gets paid now. So anyone who goes into Arcadia crosses through the Hedge. And the Hedge, again, the easiest way to describe it is Labyrinth, right? It's a hedge maze. The reason it's called the Hedge is because it's basically a hedge maze. It's a bunch of winding roads that go through thorns, and there are always thorns, even if you happen to be in like an underwater part of the hedge, or a part of the hedge that's mostly prairie, or like, wherever you are in the hedge, and the hedge has a lot of different biomes, there's always the thorns. The thorns are the pieces. The thorns guard Arcadia. They actually reach into your soul and take pieces of it out if you cut yourself on them too much. And this is actually covered in the rules under icons. And sometimes changelings lose parts of their soul to the hedge, and they need to go find them and get them back. But the hedge is this sort of... It is a liminal space. It is the space between the chaotic, rushed, disorderly world of humanity, and this place of dreams where everything happens for a reason. No, really.
Total Law and Order, essentially.
Yeah. And it's weird because when you say Total Law and Order, it's very easy to think of like, a police state, or everybody marching in lockstep. And sometimes that happens in Faerie. Sometimes it's like the Year of Plague, right? Where you have a space where it resets the plague every year. Mm-hmm. Every Earth year, it just resets the plague. And that is what's going to happen in that space because the Year of Plague said so. Everything in a Fae's domain happened because the Fae said so. And it might just happen because the Fae was bored, but it happened because the Fae said so.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very, very confusing and frightening for a lot of changelings who escape Arcadia, Because how did they get out?
If not, maybe that it's just a test. Maybe it's just another game by that Fae.
Uh-huh. Maybe the Fae really did accidentally leave that door open. Maybe they left the door open because they wanted to see what you would do with it. When you are in a world where everything happens for a reason, and then you go back into a world where things just happen because, it's very hard to adjust. The hedge is sort of a liminal space between that because the hedge is actually psychoactive. Depending on how much glamour you have in your system and how high your weird score is. The higher the weird score is, the more you are attuned to the force of the weird, and the more you can influence the shape of the hedge around you. So things happen in the hedge just because, but also you can shape the hedge. You can grow things in the hedge. You can create a home in the hedge. You can go to goblin markets in the hedge where you can just buy things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get. One of the best examples, I think it's in the core book, is there's a fae who's addicted to like this blue beeswax that her keeper's domain had in it, but she can't get it anywhere else, and she can't go back into Arcadia to get this beeswax. But what she, this honeycomb, this beeswax, what's she gonna do? Well, if you go to a goblin market, someone's gonna have it.
Mm-hmm.
And the hedge just represents the space of possibility, this sort of meeting of the chaos and the creation of the mortal world with the illusion and the, not order of Arcadia, but the cause and effect of Arcadia.
And it's almost like there's this runoff from one realm into the other.
Yes.
Like I love the example. It's like you could go through an empty subway tunnel that all of a sudden has vine growing around the arch, and all of a sudden you're in the hedge. And just it's almost like this Alice in Wonderland effect where it's like
it is very much that.
It feels familiar, but it's not entirely there. And going into the point you said about controlling it, because that's actually the next question, that the Lost often have the ability to change what the hedge is. And to me, that kind of, I took from it, it's like on the parallel of that, like the real world theme that we've kind of been seeing. It's almost like forming reality into more bearable parts, if only for a few moments.
Yep.
Okay, so I wasn't sure if I was like, is there something more to that there, that I'm on the right track, or am I just overthinking things?
No, you're on the right track, and it's very difficult to overthink Changeling because there's a lot of layers of meaning. And honestly, the great thing about games is you can read whatever the hell you want to into them. And yes, of course, there's the whole thing where, does the artist own their art, death of the author, etc., etc. And there's, of course, been all that Twitter discourse about who actually owns a product, and if the fans don't like what comes out of a product, do they have the right to be mad at the artist? And there's a lot of complicated discussion on that, but basically you can't overthink Changeling. At least I think you can't overthink Changeling, because there's always going to be a layer of hidden meaning somewhere, because that's how the weird works.
And that's beautiful that like people can get something different out of that game, and if it helps them, or if that helps them understand the game more, then so be it.
I mean, it saved my life, so it's done its job at least once.
You know what? I think that makes all the difference. If it saved one person, then it was worth it all.
Yeah. Now, granted, it is possible to run Changeling wrong, and I know this because I am cursed to play in bad Changeling games.
Oh no.
I think the first Changeling Chronicle I ever played in was a mixed chronicle, and my storyteller decided to use my Durance as her personal rape fantasy simulator 2000. And there's a lot of people who think that because you are playing Changeling, you could sexually assault your players because it's just part of the Durance. And that's not how that works. So don't do that unless people have decided that that's what they want to run.
Yeah,
also, I remember during that game, she decided to run my Durance with the other players present, but we were all young and stupid, and some of the people in that game were really shitty, and I'm no longer friends with them. And they kept making jokes during my Durance because they thought it was funny. And don't do that. That's actually why I write in the game that if you decide to run someone's Durance in any way, that you should either do it privately or make it very clear to the other players at the table that this is something serious that you are running this person through. And like, if they want to make jokes about it in character later, that's fine, but people should not be making OOC cracks about other people's suffering at the table, because that's incredibly shitty. Don't do that.
Yeah, it honestly it just seems like, it's like how to run Changeling wrong is just ignore the safety mechanics that are built into the game, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. And you
Yeah.
know what? Hopefully, if people are watching, if the boys at Gehenna are watching, maybe we can change that and end that curse for you.
Hello, boys at Gehenna. I would like you to end that curse for me. I
Run a
like
game of
playing a
Changeling.
Ferist. Oh my god, Ferist are my favorite. I'm very attached to Ferist. To be fair, I love all of the seemings and kiths, especially now,
Hmm.
because in first edition, kith was tied to seeming, so there was a limited range of things you could do. Second edition, we untethered kith from seeming,
Yeah, so you can
so
be
now
anything.
you could just do anything, and I'm so happy because we have all of these amazing kiths, including the two original ones that I wrote up for the core book, which were Helldiver and Notary, and I love those kiths.
You were at Helldiver?
Oh yeah, I came
Oh
up with
my
Helldiver.
god. I love
I
that's like one of my favorite kits.
so glad. No, Helldiver and Notary are the two kiths in the core book that were not in previous editions. I came up with those. I actually based the Helldiver off the Iroquois myth of the woman who fell from the sky,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a creation myth that I was really obsessed with when I was younger. And the Helldiver is the duck that goes down to the ocean and brings mud up and builds Turtle Island, which is the First Nations term for North America. And so the Helldiver in Changeling the Lost Second Edition is the person who can go into Twilight and get stuff. And I love them a lot. But no, I wrote all 12 kiths in the core book, and I sort of set up along with Steffi Devan, sort of set up the template for how you write kiths.
He's another person that's on my wish list for the show. We
I
just have
love
to.
Steffi.
We just
Steffi's
gotta.
very good.
We just gotta work out the logistics. Cause I always tell them,
Yeah,
7 p.m. show. We would have to pre-record it. Probably is what we're gonna have to do.
probably.
But season 2.
There
Steffi,
you go.
we're looking at you.
Looking at you. And also you could do the whole have a show with me and Steffi where we talk about the best systems to run any game, because both of us are very much of the opinion that there's no one best system. And I think a lot of gamers sort of get stuck on the idea that there is a best system.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, you can have a favorite system, and you can even have a favorite system for running a certain kind of game, but I don't think there's a best system.
I have the system We Die Here, and I've been wanting to run that for ever. It's been on my wish list. So that's definitely something I gotta have her on the show for. Depending on it, honestly, it's just figuring out the right system, because I don't want to. I get this idea in my head that I don't want to waste a guest. Then I'm like, oh, I could have had him on for here or this and that, and that's kind of held me back a little bit
I get that.
So continuing on, so we're talking about. Honestly, you're just answering my questions left and right. You are a mind reader here.
I'm here to help.
But the next one was talking about should a storyteller should leave that durance vague to be discovered, or should be a scene that's deeply explored and role played out, and it seems like you're in the camp that it should be something vaguely to be discovered later on.
It really depends on your game. I think if you're in a game where your escape changeling's on the run, you're doing your run through the hedge, then yes, I think you can role play out your durance. But as somebody who has seen Durance's role played out incredibly badly, I am very much in the camp of your Durance is something that you should sort of sketch out with your storyteller before. Okay, so here's my idea for what I think happened during my character's Durance. And then have that be something that is in play. I also, I wrote in the storytelling section for Changing the Lost, that you can play your Durance out, but that should be something that is either done privately, or that should be something that is done and making it very clear to everybody at the table, hey, this is a Durance session.
it's not something to be joked about. I honestly, like, I feel like I'd be in the camp of, like, if I were to run this in the future, which and the times that I have run it, just that it's something like I vaguely call upon every, within the set, because I feel like that's, like you were talking about, like, the trauma time travel almost.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're experiencing things in the past, sometimes it's like, it feels like it's present to you, sometimes it's all at once and it's just this crazy rush.
Yeah.
So the Lost, their time in the Fae has fundamentally changed them. It's twisted them to the whims of their captor. As a GM, how do you get your players to accept the gravitas of the situation on how terrible that actually it is, and it's not as simple, you have been given a new cool super form?
You cannot force your players to buy into anything they're not buying into. This is a question I get a lot, is how do I cause my players to do X? Unless they're buying into it, you can't cause your players to do shit.
So it's that's something that should be, like, basically say, like, you should have that talk at session 0 if they're gonna.
Yep, that is absolutely a session 0 talk. And yeah, Changeling games that I've experienced, unfortunately, because I know a lot of people who have played amazing Changeling games. This is just my curse. My experience is I have been in so many Changeling games that either turn into Rape Simulator 2000 or Idiot Superheroes. And if people aren't on board with this idea of, hey, you were fundamentally changed by these terrifying immortal god figures, and your power is what you make of it, then it's very easy for the game to turn into something else.
So would you even recommend that if people aren't going to buy into the more, dramatic and more serious side, that they should even be playing Changeling?
I mean, like, if you want to play Changeling as Idiot Superheroes, far be it from me to stop you. I've also seen people play Changeling as, like, a very kinky exploration of trauma, which is also fine. My advice is really, make sure that the group is on board with what you want to do.
Everyone's on the same page.
Players. Yeah, that goes for players, that goes for GMs. Make sure everyone's on the same page. Make sure everybody, understands what you're there to do. And tone is a really delicate thing, and it's really easy to mismanage. Like, even for a game like Bluebeard's Bride, where the tone is actually built into the setup mechanics, like where you read the fiction of Bluebeard's Bride, where all of the questions that you'd use to build your character are incredibly leading. It's so easy for someone who's just like, I'm gonna fuck around and bring comedy to the table. It's so easy for someone to just ruin that if people aren't on the same page.
That really is a shame when you gotta have those two conflicting parties. But I guess you're right. If everyone wants to play Idiot Superheroes, and that's the fun that they have in it. But it does suck when people, future players sit down to play this really engaging game and have this, I guess this certain thought of what the game is in their head, and then the other two people, kind of ruin it for them.
And that'll happen with any game, to be honest. Like, for one of my favorite games, Red Markets, the capitalist zombie poverty simulator, which I love. It's so easy for people to think it's just Walking Dead, right? And it's really hard for it can be hard if someone just wants to kill a bunch of zombies and do a run and gun to actually cause them to engage with the darker parts of the setting. And again, it really all comes down to what someone wants to do with the game.
The game's a toolkit at the end of the day.
Yes. And Changeling the Lost is specifically a toolkit to tell stories about people whose powers come from negotiation with the world around them and who have suffered through a dramatic change. And if you decide that, you're going to focus on healing from that dramatic change, that's great. If you decide that you're going to run around doing mischief with your superpowers, you can also do that. It could be an adventuring game in the hedge. There are certain things Changeling can't do, and there are certain things it can do.
It's I guess the objectives and the the eye of the group, as it were.
Yes.
So when the Lost finally escape their captors, they find their old life has been taken away from them, and most of the time they're truly lost in this world. But one thing I like about Changeling is there's often a glimmer of hope of finding people of like-minded situation. The book talks about sharing these stories in order to really put into perspective what happened. How? So I guess from in the sense of like as playing the game, but also probably as, you know, talking to you as a survivor of abuse. How important is that, sharing your pain with someone else to kind of put into perspective what happened?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked me this question because this actually goes into clarity a little bit because we were talking about clarity earlier. It is so important that that other people understand and acknowledge what you went through, because just as the Fae need an audience to their mythos, we are creatures of community, and isolating yourself in your pain and in your suffering means that now you're confused because you're in pain and suffering, but also other people aren't objectively validating what you've gone through, and then it just spirals and it's terrible. And something that was in first edition of Changeling is that you actually took a clarity hit for telling someone who wasn't a changeling what you went through. And we were going to carry that over into second edition, but I had a conversation with the developers, and what it actually got changed to is that you take a clarity hit if somebody disbelieves you, mocks you, or tries to force you into believing that your durance never happened.
Which that just goes so much into these weird like tones of like gaslighting and that's so
because the whole point of the Fae, right, is to shape you into their reality, and as a changeling you have to shape the reality around you. And if somebody tries to perform a shaping attack on you, because that's what gaslighting is, it is shaping someone almost in the same way that a Fae shapes someone into a changeling. If somebody performs a shaping attack on you, your clarity takes a hit, because the last time somebody tried to perform a shaping attack on you, it was in Faerie.
It's just all harkening back to the same the same root. And you know, something that we're gonna get into later and probably into next episode, it's honestly, it's always been the biggest how I would describe Changeling versus the Lost versus the Dreaming. So the Dreaming, you almost have like this very possibility of a happy ending. You can't escape, you can take back your life, everything can go back to normal. And in the Lost, there's really not that hope, but the hope that you find is you find others, and you know.
So I'm gonna correct you for a second.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Dreaming. No, you're good. You're good. This is a common mistake people make with Dreaming, is that there is a possibility of a happy ending. The happy ending with Dreaming is that you die before you lose your Fae soul. Because if you lose your Fae soul, all of the color and imagination goes out of the world, because the idea behind Changeling the Dreaming is, oh, you keep your childlike innocence and there's all this possibility in the world, and then as you get older you lose that possibility, which says something really grim about how the authors viewed humanity at the time. And then you just, you lose your Fae magic and you just go into mundanity. And I don't remember the actual term for it. There's a term for losing your Fae soul and not being able to engage with glamour or magic anymore. Changeling the Lost, a lot of people see, oh, there's not really a possibility of a happy ending with Changeling the Lost. I think there's far more of a possibility of a happy ending with Changeling the Lost, because you are learning how to live this new life, and you're not going to lose your Fae soul, because it has been scarred into you forever. And like, yes, you're going to be aware that there are things hunting you, and you're going to be aware that there are things, people suffering around you, people who have gone through the same durance you have, or a similar durance. And there's always going to be the true Fae and the huntsman. But now you're learning how to build a life for yourself out of what you have and the new powers that you have. And maybe you can save someone else from going into the hedge. Maybe you can create a family with the other changelings who you're living with. Maybe you can, start a garden. Maybe you can sell goblin fruits. Maybe You can help train a therapist to be the sort of person who changelings can go to. You know, there's all this possibility for healing and growth in Changeling the Lost, whereas with Changeling the Dreaming, you're almost playing True Fae, because you are playing a Fae soul that took a human soul, shunted it out of its body in the chrysalis, and replaced it with this Fae soul.
Mm-hmm.
And this Fae soul is going to die from lack of glamour if you don't actively continue doing weird, mischievous stuff. And if you lose your sense of wonder, if you fall into banality, that's what it was. If you fall into banality, then you're screwed. But banality doesn't affect lost changelings that way. I mean, yes, they can get starved of glamour and that will hurt them, but you're not losing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're learning to build a new self. Now, and it's not to say you can't lose yourself in Changing the Lost. Do you know what happens, Nick, my dear friend? Do you know what happens when you get to Weird 10 and Clarity 0?
Ooh, oh my god, I do remember this. Don't you... You go back to you go back to Arcadia, right? Or you go back to you're like forced back there because you can't exist in the world.
And what happens when you go back to Arcadia with Weird 10 and Clarity 0?
I'm gonna take a guess. Do you become a Fae?
You sure do. And you know, then it becomes this whole thing of, are you going to continue? Are you going to be party to intergenerational abuse? Are you going to be the next generation of abuser? Or are you going to break the cycle?
Which is like such a weird, like a real world parallel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, abusees often sometimes it's sometimes possible.
Become abusers. Yes.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. And that's like a whole nother can of worms. It's like,
yes. And if you want to talk about loyalists and bridge burners and privateers next week, boy howdy do I have some things to say about those. Neil Raymond Price wrote The Loyalists, and oh my god, they're so terrifying, because he talks a lot about these feelings that cause you to be so desperate for the order and stability of an abusive relationship that you need to go back. Even if you know it's hurting you, at least you can predict it.
Yeah, at least you expect it, so it's better for you, because it's this weird, like, kind of backwards. It's crazy, and it's honestly it's a lot of stuff that's being reflected in that new line in Deviant the Renegades, because I was just reading that because of the manuscript, and just reading about the the loyalists.
I worked on Deviant.
You did? Awesome.
I sure did.
It's slowly I ran it for Onyx PathCon, and
nice.
I was really excited because the game's not out yet. And it's slowly becoming one of my favorites.
Yeah. Something I really love about Deviant is I've discovered that my two favorite types of horror are systemic horror and cosmic horror.
Mm-hmm.
I love horror that has an inescapable system that you just have to learn how to live with, because I feel it's more appropriate to my day-to-day. And I love cosmic horror for a lot of the same reasons. When I say cosmic horror, I don't necessarily mean Lovecraft, because honestly, fuck Lovecraft. I know that opinion is going to get me yelled at by a bunch of people, but like, just the idea of there being bigger things than you, and them not really caring about you, or maybe they care a little too much about you and they're big. Like, I'm not super into slashers, I'm not super into torture porn. What's weird is my most recent hyper focus was The Purge, which I thought was going to be a slasher, but Wes, God bless him, was like, you should watch the first movie and Purge Election Year and the series and see if you like them. And then I did, and I'm like, this is actually a movie about fascism and the death drive taking over the society, and how people can easily be convinced to kill if they are told that their right to kill is more important than other people's right to live. Mm-hmm. But people also default towards community and mutual aid and protecting each other, and the people who are most likely to capitulate to the death drive are the wealthy and powerful.
It's the people with that power. It's that class warfare.
Yep. Robert Evans of Behind the Bastards actually did an excellent episode on Elite Panic, which is the name for that phenomenon. But I think Changeling and Cult are actually very similar in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Changeling you have these huge godlike figures that operate based on their own mythos and can't operate outside of that mythos, and in Cult you have these huge godlike figures that operate inside their own mythos and can't actually operate outside of that mythos because of the way the prison is structured.
And they're always gathering, and their goal almost is to gather more people into their clergy, into their cult, because that's what powers them.
Yep.
So yeah, that's a really good parallel to draw there. It's crazy, and often, like, I know I said this earlier, but it often speaks something like bounds and leaps in our own reality, in our own real world, that the power that people often give to these abusers, that's the thing that fuels them. Is if they didn't have those victims, they didn't have the people that abuse, they'd be nothing.
Yep. And that's why I feel that games that take this very magical approach or very fantastic approach to abuse are more honest than games that are just like, we're gonna play abuse now. Like Bluebeard's Bride is all about magical realism, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's a game about how patriarchy harms people. And not just women either.
Just everyone in general.
Yep.
And I feel like there's something to say about like making something more digestible, that people, like, they might not realize what they're playing, but at the end of the day they understand it on some level. And you're hoping subliminally they take some of those lessons with them.
And it's not even just about making it more digestible, it's also, it feels more real to me as a survivor of abuse to have that weird uncertainty or magical realism or fantastic element. It's actually why, like, the genre magical realism was super popular in Latin America, especially during the years of like Operation Condor. Like the book The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende came out of Pinochet's regime, and she wrote it after her family escaped from Chile. But at its heart, it is a story about intergenerational abuse and sort of debts and community, but it's also a book about there's a girl who can see ghosts in the house. Mm-hmm. And weird shit happens around her, and also these like weird magical things happen in the house. But it's also a book about, Pinochet's regime, and to me, as a survivor of abuse, it feels more realistic to have that weird magical shit, because trauma is weird and magical. And I don't mean magical as a compliment. I mean it has that weird sense of power and liminality to it that a lot of other things don't. It's why I say, for example, again, that like Twin Peaks by David Lynch it's a magical realism story about trauma. It's a story about the town that allowed Laura Palmer to be killed, and it feels more realistic to me as a story about trauma than like any Criminal Minds episode, because it has that element of magic, that storytelling to it. Yeah, I definitely would agree. And those are often the shows and the media that get remembered the most. I can't tell you for shit like most Criminal Minds episode, but I've seen all of Twin Peaks and Walk with Fire, so Fire Walk with Me is one of my favorite movies. Like, legit, people are like, oh my god, this is such a hard movie to watch, you're gonna have to recover after it. And I'm like, dude, this is a movie about Laura Palmer finally getting to tell her own fucking story for the first time, because for the past 2 seasons everybody's been telling me Laura Palmer was like this, Laura Palmer was like that, this is who Laura Palmer actually was. And then you actually get to see Laura Palmer tell her and it was like a fucking relief for me, because for the first time there weren't these men who wanted to possess her telling her story to me.
It's definitely, Twin Peaks is as a whole is just one of those series I feel like everyone should watch. Yeah, it's so good. Everyone, if you haven't watched it, watch it. I mean, they've never been able to really recreate that. They've tried with other shows and they just
because then they I think in a lot of ways they lost the idea behind Twin Peaks, because it's like, oh yeah, it's a weird surreal show, it's a weird surreal cop show. Yeah, when Twin Peaks had so many elements from so many different genres and was creating this unique liminal space in which to tell this story about intergenerational abuse and the way we view abuse victims. And a lot of people think Dale Cooper is autistic, which I think is great. So you now have this neurodivergent detective solving the mystery of this abused woman, and it becomes the story of an outsider having to break into a closed system in order to shed light on what happened to this person, because people inside the system weren't going to be able to look through the system to see what happened.
Because the system is on its own fundamentally broken.
Yep.
And that's
the point of the system is to perpetuate the system, which is also the case with Fae in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's the
case with Fae, it's the case with abusers, it's the case with the conspiracy and Deviant, it's the case with fucking Skynet in Terminator, which is one of my favorite hyper focuses recently. It's the case with the Death Angels and the Archons in Cult. The point of the system is to perpetuate the system. And the cruelty is the point, as a lot of people like to say.
It's like, I keep saying it, but like everything's secular. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's always a cycle. So before I go into the next topic, which is we're going to talk about the Changeling themselves, the Lost themselves, I need to ask, because you brought it up, if it's in your hyper focus, what is your favorite Terminator movie?
Terminator 2.
Okay. I respect that opinion. Mine's Terminator 1, but it's okay.
Okay, to be fair, my favorite part of Terminator 1 is Kyle Reese.
Excellent.
I would die for Kyle Reese. People who say Brendan Fraser and The Mummy as Himbo are wrong. It's Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese. He is the precious, most goodest baby.
I agree with you. He definitely is, in terms of like male characters that are not the direct protagonist. He fits the bill very well. Like he's great in that movie.
Something that I think people get wrong about Terminator a lot is that while it has a lot of action in it, it is not an action movie.
Oh no, it's like a thriller to almost a horror movie.
The first movie is a horror romance.
Okay,
because Kyle Reese fell in love with Sarah because of a picture, and then came through time to protect her, and like, fuck yeah. And people, oh my god, someone who I no longer speak to tried to tell me that because I like Kyle Reese and Duncan Idaho from Dune and Geralt of Rivia from The Witcher, that my type is grim, stoic crusaders. And I'm like, have you watched any of these?
I would say especially Kyle Reese. Kyle Reese is a huge romantic.
Yeah, that dude is not grim or stoic.
Yeah, and even I would argue that Geralt, everyone kind of, you might, by watching like a single story of him, you might be like, oh, this dude's stoic, but all the stuff that he gives up in the sake of love.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, hello, a woman is talking to me. I like woman. Woman tell me to do thing? Yes, I do thing.
And I will agree with you. That's definitely like a thriller romance, horror romance, just because it's the product of that romance that saves the world technically in the far future. That's when John Connor is born. Oh man, we've diverged off into so many topics, but you
could totally run a Terminator Changeling story. I'm just saying.
I put it down on the list. We're putting it down on the list.
Okay, on the list.
On the list. But going back, but you know what? I think it's great that we're diverging, because I think that means we're having a natural conversation.
We're having a good time.
We're having a great time, and that's where the best deep dives are.
Having a good time. I have my ADHD. It's going full blast. Here we go. Here we go. What's the next topic?
So we're going to talk about the Changeling themselves. All right. So we talk about, we're going to get into seemings and we're going to get into kifs. Let's start with the seemings. Would you mind giving a brief an explanation on what a seeming is and how it informs not only what happened to the Lost while in Arcadia, But it's also I like when I'm from reading it, it's like also their story or their escape and their approach to the world now.
So seemings and kiths are actually kind of a combination of that.
Mm-hmm.
Seemings and kiths, I forget which one is. One of them is specifically why a fae took you, and one of them is what you were shaped into. And I forget which is which, but they're sort of like sandwiched together. So let's just
Cover
sort
them
of
both.
cover them both. So in the Chronicles of Darkness, you have a double splat. Basically, you have an X and Y axis, and you can combine them in any way. So, like in Vampire the Requiem, you have your political alignment and you have your clan. So, like, you could be a Carthian Deva who's, super into freedom of expression and art and democracy, or you could have an Invictus Ventru who's all about hierarchy and order and being the top dog. And those are two very different character concepts. But then you can sort of mix it up and have an Invictus Deva who's very much about creating art for the powerful and, being a patron or having a patron, or very much about power dynamics and power exchange. Or you could have a Carthian Ventru who is very much about, oh, well, I'm a philanthropist and I use my power and wealth to cause other people to have power and wealth, and a rising tide lifts all boats and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So in Changeling, you have your seeming and your kith, and they're sort of two different things that describe who you are as a person. God, I don't even remember how many seemings there are.
Oh, I actually have the PDF open right now.
Oh, if
So
you would tell me how many seemings there are, that would be great.
There are 6. There are beasts, darklings, elementals, fairest, ogres, and wizened.
So seemings are sort of your over category, right? Like these are one of, I believe there's only going to be 6 seemings in total, like in general, but there's going to be a shit ton of kiths.
Oh yeah.
Your seeming is your over category. It's kind of like the core of what you are, but then it gets narrowed into specifications that can be described with kiths. So like an elemental, let's see, which one do I like today? An elemental sand harrowed, which is which would be sort of like a changeling that in their durance was part of a desert or an undersea landscape or somewhere where you're being blasted with sand and dirt constantly. The changeling that's very sort of attuned to this idea of grinding grit and wind and erosion is going to be very, very different than ogre sand harrowed, which still would grow up in a very have their durance in a similar location, but whereas the elemental is going to be more about the force of the wind, of being the wind that erodes the rock, the ogre sand harrowed is going to be more about being the rock that is harrowed by the wind. So you get all of these sort of cool combinations, because every kith and seeming combination is going to be very different than every other kith and seeming combination. Like every kith and seeming has its own blessing, which combine in really interesting ways. They all have like these little unique things that they can do in addition to the contracts, which are their equivalent of disciplines. So yeah, I mean, I love the way kiths and seemings are structured because you get all of these little mixy and matchy things. Like another example, one of my favorite kiths that I rewrote is the Playmate, which can actually trade their own sanity to heal other people's wounds. Which that doesn't come from real life at all. Why would you think that? But like again, a fairest playmate, which may take the form of like a beloved mother or a beautiful nymph or something, is going to be very different from a beast playmate, which might be like a greyhound puppy or a fuzzy, somebody who has like catgirl features, or like something that reminds you of a playful, loving animal companion, basically. And the way the kiths and seemings express themselves are going to vary based on the person who has them as well as the combination.
And something interesting about kiths as well, because I had to, like, I was reading through the book just, to get myself prepared for this. Is specifically like, it's often like the abstract job they have in Arcadia, but it's also like the method of coping.
Yep. Oh,
that they
very
dedicate
much.
themselves to. And I love the example that they say that, like, you can be, using your kith, maybe using the bright one is one of the examples. You could
I
have
love
been,
the bright one.
yeah, you could have been the fire that the true Fae used to light the world around you. And in your escape, your fire turned into this raging, you fanned the flames and became this inferno. And that's the form you take. Or maybe you burned out completely.
Yep.
And that was the end result. And I love how, like, you can be it's so open-ended with each concept.
Thank you. I wrote those.
And so how to you how much does a kith further diversify two seemings that might be the same?
How do you mean?
Like, because in something we talked about a little earlier, like in Changeling First Edition, there was restrictions between seeming what kiths you could be once you took a seeming, and now you've cleared the board and it's completely open-ended. But you could technically have a whole group of changelings that are all the same seeming and be such different characters, right, due to the kiths. And
or you could have a bunch of changelings who are all the same kith with different seemings.
That's true. Definitely true as well. How would you recommend? Is there like a recommend for people playing similar seemings, or is it just go wild? Honestly,
go nuts. Honestly, unless you are playing a campaign that has, like, one of the big reveals is going to be, oh, you all came from the same Fae, or like you're all connected to a similar Trod or Fae or place in the hedge by your seemings. I just go nuts.
Hey, you heard it here, folks. You're playing Changeling, go fucking nuts.
Go fucking nuts.
Let's lose it. So Arcadia changes you, but often it seems like in the fiction that escaping Arcadia is what physically changes you the most. Why is the lost escape, is the event of the escape itself so determinate of what the character becomes?
So in a lot of ways, the way you choose to escape sort of frames how you see the world. Like, if you're in Arcadia and you were a dragon, for example, Draconic is one of the kiths we're putting in an upcoming book, because I love the Draconics. I think they're great. And I'll tell you the opening lines I had for that kith, because I really like that one.
Okay.
But if you are a dragon, that's not going to be able to hold its shape in the real world, in the mortal world. And the way the weird works is it will close itself around you in order for you to be able to pass in the real world. But you also have to have a form that you can sustain behind that mask. So you escaping causes you to lose parts of your soul. I don't remember if you refer to it as the soul. I think it is. But you lose parts of yourself in the hedge as you escape, because you're basically just charging. Yeah, you're basically just charging through the thorns trying to get out. You're not going to be making an orderly escape. And as bits of you get taken off, your sort of final form is solidified, right? Because of the way you escaped. So your flight from Arcadia, your escape from Arcadia, the way the thorns tear at you as you flee Arcadia actually shape your mind, body, and soul.
It's and do you think that there's like a real world parallel to that, almost, about like it's like escaping, your abuser kind of shapes what you become in the future? Or is that something that's more of just something for the book's fiction?
I think it's a little of both. Like, obviously I did not escape my parents by becoming a runaway or anything. I escaped by going to college and slowly distancing myself from them, and I think I would be a very different person if I had become a runaway. and if I hadn't, let them pay my way through college.
Hmm.
But I think it's also like fiction for the book. Both. It's
Yeah.
both.
No, understandable, because like at the end of the day, you are making a system, and so you
Mhm.
want everything to link back to it. But sometimes fiction just needs to be for
Yep.
fiction's sake. But doesn't mean to anyone that's watching that you can't take something more of it. Isn't that the beauty of art?
Yep.
Coming into one of my favorite questions, and one of the
Oh boy.
like we're in the kind of last stretch before we get into, so we're gonna get into some side stuff, and then I'll call the end
Okay.
of this part. So needles and threads,
Yes.
which I love because you're basically with the needle you're picking your character's personal identity, and then the
Mhm.
thread is the reason that keeps them going, the thread that
Yep.
they're hanging by. When you're telling people, or when you're having people create characters in a Changeling game, what would be your advice you would give to the GM or to the players in general when choosing the needle and thread?
Um, so I can tell you the history of needle and thread before I
Yeah.
go into this. Because the World of Darkness games in their earlier editions had your nature and demeanor, and the first edition of the Chronicles of Darkness had your virtue and your vice,
Mm-hmm.
and now virtue and vice are replaced with different things in each game, except unless you're human, in which case you still have a virtue and vice. And they used to be like the 7 deadly sins and the 7 heavenly virtues, and it changes between games because the themes of the games are different. And needle and thread, something that's great about needle and thread is it ties into clarity, because clarity is seeing things as they are versus seeing the illusions of Feyre, or seeing what Feyre wants you to see. And needle and thread is so, like, it's not your personal mythos necessarily like it can be, but it is the thing that drives your character. It provides story hooks for the GM, and making your needle and thread something compelling allows the GM to tell stories around that, and sort of allows things to bounce off your clarity. Because what if something hurts your thread? Like, what if something bumps up against your
Mm-hmm.
thread? What if something hurts one of your touchstones, which your needle is tied to? Like,
A lot of bad stuff can happen.
bad stuff.
Well, just like,
and you want bad stuff to happen because it's a horror game.
mm-hmm.
But it's also a game about healing and not even necessarily overcoming, because a lot of people think when you say overcoming that you're, oh, well, I'm human again and I'm over it. Like, no, you're creating, like I've said throughout this whole thing, you're creating this whole new self. You're building a new self, and you have this idea of what you want to be, because your needle can even be something you want to be, like something you're striving towards. You don't always have to be a perfect exemplar of your needle, because if you were a perfect exemplar of your needle the whole time, you'd be a what?
Pretty bad needle.
You'd be a true fae.
Yeah. You'd be weird 10, and you would be doing maybe hammering other people into needles.
Yeah, don't talk to me right now. I'm doing hot fae shit. But
and almost like needles, like metal itself, you're malleable. You don't.
mm-hmm.
And I think I'm about to get really personal here with people here. Because often I feel like we think that we need to, if we look at our needle and we think, okay, this needle needs to be shaped this way because this needle needs to be useful, then this needle needs to achieve something. But there's something beautiful in seeing yourself become something you never thought it could be. And that's amazing, because if it works for you, then that's what matters. And
hell yeah.
Humanity is malleable, and changelings are malleable, and the lost are malleable. Because if we weren't malleable, we would be fae, right? That's like
right.
exactly what you said.
That's right. And also, something I love about the needle and thread is it's very specifically this image of making something. Because you don't just have a needle and thread chilling out being a needle and thread. If you have a needle and thread, you're making something.
Yeah, you're making it. a tapestry of some sort, whether it
Yep.
be...
Or shit, you're mending a sock. You're making clothing. You're making a blanket. You're fixing something. You're creating something, which is something the true fae cannot do.
They can't fix. They can't embroider.
No.
They can't add beauty to something else entirely.
Now, if their title involves embroidery, sure, but they can't make any new embroidery. They can only copy patterns that other people have made.
They're not a freeform needle and thread.
Correct.
And I think that the thread thing's interesting because, like, your thread can change colors throughout your story.
Yup.
Your thread could snap and you could have a new thread.
Huh?
And it's, you know, and that's something that, like, oh my god, I just love it because the Changeling are everything the Fae are not.
Yep.
And that like, going back to that drives the Fae fucking nuts.
It sure does.
They hate it, and that's why it's like a realization. That's why they kidnap you, because they want to. They're like, well, I'm gonna force you to be like me. I'm gonna force you into that box, into that category, because fuck, if I was, so must you.
Yep.
And your identity, and I'm sorry for going off on this tangent, but
No,
like,
you're good. Continue.
You're like, your identity as a changeling, just seeing the fact that you're lost, just seeing the fact that you're a changeling, like that's a set that every time the Fae looks at you, the Fae realizes that it's failed in something, that it that you are a testament to its failure, to its undoing. God, that's so cool. I love it.
So
I fucking love
good.
the system. So my last question on the game, before we get into the few other stuff. And awesome, someone was talking about they just been watching for 5 minutes and feel like they already learned so much interesting viewpoint. This will be on VOD.
Yeah, I hope you watch the VOD because we talk a lot about some cool shit.
Yeah, and a lot about stuff that might be personal to people out there. And, you know,
hell yeah,
much like Changeling, whatever you get out of this deep dive, if it helps one person out,
that's what we're here for.
So this is a little bit off what we were talking about. So when people are thinking of the Fae, people will often tend to think of, like what you said before, these tall,
beautiful autistic elves,
whimsical forest beings. But in choosing a mine, how weird and off the stereotype can a player be in choosing physically how the Arcadia shaped them? What is like some examples you can think of like how you could break this mold?
It's always interesting hearing how people pronounce that word, because I pronounce it mean and I know other people pronounce it mine, and I'm sure other people pronounce it other different ways. No, I've heard it pronounced a bunch of ways. I'm not saying you're pronouncing it wrong. I just find it funny how many different ways there are to pronounce it. So means will always have, for humanoid changelings, I don't think we have any examples of any non-humanoid changelings. Because I feel there's not really much of a reason for Fae to kidnap animals. But a mean will always have a standard humanoid shape. Because that's the way the weird functions. You were created off a human template, so you're going to have a humanoid shape. Now, if you're in Arcadia, you might not look human. Because you are in a realm that allows you to be what you were shaped to be. But if you are in the hedge, or you're in the mortal world, your mien is always going to be at least mostly human. You might have like ears or tail or scales, or you might be a shadow person, which is something that's coming up in an upcoming book. I can't tell you more than that. Yeah, there you go. Or you might be made out of stone, or you might be, 7 feet tall. But you're going to be human shaped mostly. Now that can change as your weird goes up, because your mien can actually become very unearthly. You can grow extra arms or have a third eye. Actually, I think you can have a third eye when your weird is lower, because it still fits the humanoid shape. Yeah. But you like grow extra arms, or have like a 10-foot tail, or be an unearthly being of like biblical angelical beauty and stuff. But you're gonna have a humanoid shape. Like even like the Draconics look humanoid, but like they might have like scales on their face, or have a tail, or forked tongue, or wings. But yeah, no, mostly human, because again, you were created off of a human template.
Awesome. Well, everyone, this has been We went through my entire list for part 1, so I gotta save some spot for part 2. And we've talked a lot. We talked a shit ton. We talked for 2.5 hours.
We talked so many.
And we're gonna do more talking. But first, I'm gonna do something I do every episode, and maybe it's a little bit forced, but I feel like that everyone needs some nice feelings in their life, or some people just need talking to. So I want to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, this is something I didn't write in the notes, but this game is, we talked about this game about is escaping your abuser, your captor, and making a new life for yourself regardless of how it changed you. So for all the people out there that maybe are in these situations that that they're victims of abuse, or maybe they have escaped those situations and now kind of wondering how their life proceeds on, or how they kind of go on and live as one of the lost, essentially. What, as someone that has survived that and gone through that like terrible ordeal, what would be your advice to them?
We love you. There are people who love you, and it's hard to express that. It's very hard to accept that. And there's a lot of advice that says, oh, you can't love people unless you love yourself. And that's not entirely true. You can absolutely love other people if you don't love yourself. It's just much harder to accept their love in a healthy way. And I get it. I still struggle with it. I've been with my husband for 9 years, and I've been with my other longest partner for 5 years. And sometimes it's very hard for me to believe that they still love me, because I'm a crazy person. But I mean, study attachment theory, find a trauma-informed therapist, talk to your friends. Like, the best thing you can do is build a community around yourself, or reach out to people who, love you and want to support you. You're so much more than the things that were inflicted on you, and it's not your fault. Yeah, something that, thank you. Something that I read in a book. So I've been reading Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. It is unfortunately not my favorite, because he very clearly does not like loud people, and writes a lot about how angry loud people are narcissistic and borderline, and does the whole thing where you're like, oh, you're not you're not a borderline, you're not a narcissist, you're one of the good mentally ill people. And like, I really hate that is so prolific in trauma literature, because people with narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder are not necessarily evil, and we have this whole stereotype about them. And borderline especially is very much a trauma associated disorder. But something he talks about in that book is, there's two things he talks about in that book. The first is take the best and leave the rest. And that has been one of the best lessons I have ever learned, because it's so hard for me as somebody who has attachment issues and who tends to split things into, black and white, yes or no, good or bad, all of the time. It's so hard for me to look at something that has flaws and be like, oh, I like this and there's a lot of value in it for me. Like, people I like criticized Changeling the Lost First Edition for being kind of scattered in its message, and it was a little bit, and that's okay, because it was trying to become what it is now in this edition. And like, I would get very defensive, because when they were like, oh, the message of 1E is kind of scattered, I'd be like, you're saying it's a bad game, and would get very upset about that. But again, it's this idea of take the best and leave the rest. You can find value in something that maybe has a lot of issues, or you can find issues in something that other people think has a lot of value, and that's okay. It takes practice. I know, like, I'm going through Pete Walker's book by making notes in the margins, because I really struggle with some of his attitudes. And there's a lot of good things in that book, but I actually have to write in the book about things I don't like or things I do like, because otherwise I can't focus and I start to go into black and white thinking again. But it's a good practice for me, because I'm now learning to apply nuance to things that I might otherwise, throw against the wall. The other thing is, he talks about how it can be really hard for people with attachment trauma, and attachment theory is very interesting, and if you want to look it up and talk about it next time, like, I think it's something that's very relevant to Changeling. But for people with attachment damage, it's very, very easy for us to not get attached to people or to not trust people, but something that actually helps us soothe our attachment trauma enough to talk to somebody who can help with it is by engaging with a pet. Or, hell, watching a stream and commenting on the stream, or reading a book or listening to an audiobook and getting very into that. Having parasocial relationships can actually help heal attachment trauma, so long as it's not the only attachment you ever plan on engaging with, or so long as the parasocial attachment is never mistaken for a social attachment unless the other side of the parasocial attachment acknowledges it as such, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That was an excellent answer. And I hope if there's anyone out there watching that we, someone is going to be able to use that information.
Yeah.
Jax, I've said it before. You have been literally on my wish list for the show since like the very beginning, and I'm so happy to have you. Not once, but twice in 2 weeks when we continue this.
Yeah.
On the 28th, it'll be the end of the year. Literally, probably the last stream Gehenna will have for the year will be the deep dive, where we close out the finale we made to a season, and I couldn't have picked someone to have it better with.
So before we go, I have a question for you.
Oh, yes.
If you were to build a changeling character, what would your seeming kith and court be?
So, looking through the options, I'm not gonna lie, I've always had a fascination for the ogres because I feel like they never. When I ever played Changeling, no one ever goes to them because I guess like they just have these like stereotype, like the people I play Changeling with, they're like, oh, we want to be very like, we're broken but beautiful, and I get that. And, the ogres have this kind of, like, meanness to them and, like, this brutalness. And I've always been like, oh, that's something that's interesting that will never be. And I really like Helldiver.
They're the fight response.
Yeah, they're the... this is how I deal with my shit.
Yep.
Is by hitting things and lashing out. And I always liked Helldiver, and I've used that. But I think I said this earlier, I think Bright One would be great. And I think a Bright One ogre... Then court, I'll, if you don't mind, because we're gonna go, that will be the first time we jump into probably when we come back is the courts. I'm gonna save my answer for then.
Oh, okay. I can tell you mine.
Okay, yeah. What is your next changeling gonna be?
I am a Ferris playmate in the spring court.
Okay.
Either a Ferris notary or a Ferris playmate in the spring court.
I can definitely see that. What we were talking about, like the courts before, and like you're like, oh, you're like about the whole, oh, you're an autumn court Ferris, of course, and it's like, oh, that's like a call out, but yeah, it is real. I guess I just relate to the idea of the bright, like I don't know. I've always, whenever in groups of people, I've always been considered the super, like, the sunny disposition, the optimist.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where I get the bright one from. But lately in my life, in the past couple years, it might be just an underlying issue that maybe I have to face myself. But every time I'm met with conflict in my fight or flight response, I just go right for fight. But I'm usually a pacifist, and that's been my whole thing. But I guess
No, I'm sort of a I am a fight fawn combo, which is very weird. Because according to Pete Walker, there are four physiological responses. According to other trauma therapists, there are 3. It really depends on who you're reading, but for Changeling, I use Pete Walker's 4, which are fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And fawn is like you reach out to people and you're like trying to make them like you, basically, like you're groveling at them, you're trying to make them like you. And freeze is like your deep primal, like if I just move it will go, if I just don't move it will go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my responses tend to be fight or fawn. But when I'm alone and like struggling to attach to people, it's usually freeze.
That's completely understandable.
Yeah.
And it's something we're definitely gonna have to. I feel like more stuff about ourselves, because I feel like with anything with these programs, when you talk about a system, especially a system you love, you're gonna let a little bit of yourself leak into it. And
You sure are.
It happened with Kult, with Mark talking about personal stuff, and hell, it happened with Miguel when he was on here talking about Mothership, which I didn't think
awesome.
I didn't think a game of sci-fi horror was gonna bring out like something personal.
Horror always brings out something personal, which is something I love about it.
It definitely like it's therapeutic in a way, and that's a panel that'll probably be talked about by VHC 2021 is games and therapy, and just how
better fucking put me on that panel.
I wasn't in charge last time, and I'm actually, to be honest, I'm not in charge this time, but they know.
Okay, you know I have my wish list. I have one.
Yeah, you sent to them. They know. They were like, yeah, Jax is like on the ball. She's like,
I'm ready.
So we definitely have taken that consideration. Everyone watching, thank you for watching the deep dive. Like I said, we have one more episode before the end of the year, and the season is over, and then I'll be taking a little bit break. Just from me to you, I hope you guys have been enjoying the show up until this point, and will continue to enjoy the show. Not gonna lie, stuff in my life, not in the most amazing of places right now, especially with this whole pandemic.
Mood.
Yeah, it's hit a little close to home in the last 2 weeks, and was not ready for 2020 to give. I thought most of the stuff was over, but apparently it's going down swinging, and
yup. So
from me to you, I love you all. Thank you for watching. You're amazing. Stick around though after the credits, because I'll be right back. Because I will be showing a special preview of a project I've been working on.
Hell yeah. Should I put my link tree somewhere?
Yes. Oh, if you want to, I'm so sorry. Jax, plug your shit. What do you want to?
I'm gonna put my link tree in the Zoom chat so you can link it in the chat.
Fuck yeah.
But if you want to find me, I am at linktree/rufflejacks. That's all of my stuff in one place. If you want to find my website, that is jacquelinebryk.design. I sell stuff on DriveThruRPG and Itch.io. I have a Patreon at patreon.com/L'Atelier d'Apocalypse. I apparently wound up choosing the most difficult fucking name for people to put on Patreon, but I'm gonna send it to Nick so that y'all
sure. I'll
find it.
And I'm gonna link your Twitter as well.
Cool. You can also find me on Twitter as Rufflejacks. You can honestly, you can just find me on most social media as Rufflejacks. That's the easiest way to find me. I have a LARP business. It's Ruffled Feathers, but unfortunately, I started it earlier this year, so I don't have a lot going on there. But once stuff clears up and we establish a new normal, hopefully I'll be able to run some more LARP stuff through that company. But yeah, here I am, and I hope y'all enjoyed me hanging out on Nick's show. And Nick, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. It was amazing.
And I will see y'all in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. And you know what? I think maybe we'll talk about, as a side topic next time, I want to talk more about digital LARP, because that got me interested.
Yeah.
I know some TikTok users that are watching right now. Did you know you can LARP over TikTok?
You can absolutely LARP over TikTok.
Jax has done it.
I'm doing it. I have a site. I'm part of a cyberpunk LARP on TikTok right now. Someone told me that my character was more cyberpunk than all of 2077, and I was very flattered.
That's awesome. All right. Well, I'll let Jax go here, and we'll be right back for that special preview I got planned for all of you. I love you guys. Catch you in 2 weeks. Jax, you were amazing.
Have a safe holiday, please.
As always, good night. Hey everyone, I'm back. It's me. That's who you're looking for. I hope you're still in the show because I have a special preview for you all. It's something I'm working on. It's actually not going to be on Gehenna Gaming. It'll be on Carrying Comfort Studios. If you looked at Twitter in the last, like right before the interview started, you might have seen it already. But if not, this is for you. I hope you enjoy this special teaser for my new project.
On that fated land, a great war shall transpire. Darkness will prevail, and the light expire. First comes the day, then comes the night. 13 hearts of darkness, 7 hearts of light. The 13 keys, they say, to open Kingdom Heart's might. Only war is the way through the heart and soul's plight. Kingdom Hearts, the Interstitial War, premiering January 1st, 2021 on Carrying Comfort Studios.
And that was that. I'll be running a Kingdom Hearts inspired game using the system Interstitial Our Hearts Intertwine, created by Link Smith Games, aka Riley Hopkins, amazing game designer. There's some amazing podcasts out there where they play Interstitial, a very good independent game. I hope you all have a great night, and I'm glad I was able to share that. I'll be sitting in Discord probably soon. I don't know. Send me a message. I'm always free. You can find me at Nobleman Nick on Twitter. I recently passed 100 followers. Like, holy shit. Not getting like 100 more would be cool. So let's if you can, get me those followers. I want to be famous, man. I want to be like an industry shredder. You know, all that shit. But if not, you can find me at Nobleman Nick on Instagram as well. That's more personal, but I'm cool with sharing my personal life. You can always find me on Gehenna Gaming's Discord as well. I'm listed under Orpheus there, or you could just search up Nobleman Nick as well. It's pretty obvious which one I am there. You can always free to message me, talk about games. I'm always looking for friends. I'm always around to talk. I'm a very, very social person. I like to be, and I want to have more friends. So, or just poke me on Twitter. That's cool too. Special thanks again to Gehenna Gaming. We have some amazing stuff going on. You will actually see me. This is a stacked week for me. So you're going to see me Wednesday night, tomorrow night, in the Kult, episode 3 of our Kult live play titled Echoes of the Past, run by Marchosius, aka Mark Q. Anderson, as well as our lovely cast. We got Persephonoth playing Julie Cause. We got Raquel Skellington playing the military lieutenant Esther. I was trying to think of my ranks. We got good old Zach from ATL by night, who's fucking Zachary Votto. I can never say that name right. I don't want to say it wrong, but Zachary is playing good old oh my god, I cannot believe I'm forgetting the name. I have the worst memory. Holy shit, I suck at this, but whatever. Zachary plays a badass prosecutor. I almost said persecutor. That's bad. Badass prosecutor. He's awesome. He wears a suit. I always wear a turtleneck. Persephone always has some awesome fucking hair going on, and Raquel's just awesome in general. So you should definitely all give them follows. That ad and stuff will be up tomorrow. You could see me as Matthias Castillo, a very fucking prick tech entrepreneur, much like I am in real life. Yeah. And then you can see me in January. And then after that, I will be back on Saturday night. Holy shit, Saturday night. I'll be back running Saturday night one-shots. What does that mean, Saturday night one-shots? I'm going to be running Vampire the Masquerade. Holy shit, my first Vampire the Masquerade game live on stream ever. I've played in a few and I've jammed a few. Time to take my hand at it. And something special about this one, you know what we're playing? Second Inquisition. That's right. We're playing for the other team, boys, and we're hunting some kindred in this goddamn stream. All right, I love you all. You're all amazing. Have a great night. Also follow Carrion Comfort Studios, or it's Comfort Carrion. Follow Comfort Carrion and Brother Wes, because Interstitial, or Kingdom Hearts: The Interstitial War, will premiering January 1st, 2021. We're starting out the real life. I got my own series, boys and girls, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time, December 28th, for the end of the deep dive season. Anyway, it'll be back for season 2. Hopefully, maybe we'll get canceled in between. I don't fucking know. You all have an amazing day. I love you all. You guys are great, and yeah. Peace out.
Thank you.